Last time we discussed the pre-production and production phases of a project. That's where we go from concept to actual filming and everything in between. Today we're going to be discussing post-production. Now that's where we take all the footage we just filmed and we cut it up, we color it, we sound mix, and sometimes we'll do some voiceover, which is something we're going to talk about today. So why waste any time? Let's just get right into it. Okay, now I like to edit in Premiere Pro. There's also Avid, Final Cut, some people even edit in DaVinci, but I've always used Premiere. It's the most functional for me. It is kind of the industry standard when it comes to commercial and video work. If you're going to do feature films, Avid is kind of the industry standard, but for our purposes, Premiere Pro works just great. So getting right into it, this is one of the sequences I've used. This is a finished sequence, but it is uncolored. I really wanted to use an uncolored one for this example so that when we then go into DaVinci and do some of the coloring and take a look at how I colored it, we can see how I went from the log footage, which log footage is the uncolored, completely untouched footage, to a colored finished product. So like I said in part one of this series, this entire commercial is built around two sequences. The first was the opening, which is this sequence right here, where it kind of match cuts between the models until they all individually, until it all goes with them together. So that was the first sequence I built it around. And then the second sequence was they all kind of have their power pose and we're looking up at them with the building behind them and they all kind of get their moment in the spotlight. So that was kind of the beginning and end that I knew I wanted to have. When we were filming this, we discussed this in like the first part of this video as well. Low budget filmmaking doesn't really allow you the luxury of being able to like block off streets and rent locations. So when we were filming in the street, we weren't able to shut the street down. So you'll notice as we play, the background doesn't always perfectly align. We got pretty close, but it doesn't perfectly align. And that's because when cars would come or anything like that, we would have to move out of the way and then go back in. So we never got exactly the same spot we had lined up prior. So what I was able to do is essentially, you can see in this window right here, the effects controls, I moved them around, rotated them, scaled them, moved them in the frame in order to get them all to line up. Like for example, if I reset all of this, the difference between what we filmed exactly and then the way I lined it up in post-production. And then same goes for this one. If we reset everything, you can see how it moved again. This is what we originally shot. This is how I lined it up in post. Originally shot, post. And now what this essentially allowed me to do was line them up so that the shots came out the way I envisioned them in my head. And it's just this little like kind of neat way where I was talking about the way that post-production really comes into play for low budget filmmaking. Like this is a prime example of that. We couldn't block off this street. We still wanted to get this really creative shot to kind of up the production value of the video. So we just did the best we could on the day. We didn't want to waste time being like, is it in the exact right spot? Because again, with that low budget filmmaking, you don't have the luxury of time. You don't have the luxury of renting spaces. So let's work efficiently. Well, what's the most efficient way to do this? I hate to say it because it's almost like a cliche in the industry, but it's like, we'll fix it in post. And thankfully we were able to, and it's like, I wasn't able to get the backgrounds to match, but what I was able to get in the exact same space every single time was I could line up the models perfectly. And the way I did that is actually like a pretty simple trick. I just kind of stretched it out, take the opacity down to like 20%, enough where you could see the outline of the model over top. You know, maybe that wasn't clear enough. Let's just bring it to 50. Great, now you can see the models over top of each other. Now we can take it back. And everything's lined up again. And we can play it through. Bam. And like, as you can see, they're all lined up with each other. And that was just all I did, was I would just drag out the clip over top of the other one, turn the opacity down so I could see them overlaid on top of one another, and then just make sure that they were lined up. And it sells the trick. No one notices that the backgrounds aren't the same because the subject, what we're looking at, what our eye is drawn to, all does line up. And so now when it comes to the ending was a lot simpler to kind of navigate because as you can see here, the camera doesn't move. We have that one rack focus where we start on our foot and then we rack to our subject in the front here. As you can see, all of them, the camera doesn't move. The camera is on what's called a hi-hat, and that's essentially like a tripod, you know, what is holding up the camera. It's a very, 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 very small version of that can essentially rest on the ground. And so it just allowed us to look directly kind of up at the models and be able to get them from like a lower angle and kind of make them really look like heroes. So just make sure they're lined up, and they all were, and then just kind of let them play, figure out the right rhythm of the edit that they need, and then just let it go. When I talk about rhythm of editing, that is something that there's like a few philosophies on. There is, depending on who you ask, you'll get different opinions on whether you should or should not edit to music. What I mean by that is, especially with commercials and music videos more than anything else, one crutch an editor could have is editing directly on the beat. So like every time there's a downbeat, they cut. And that's not every single time, it's just like they will only cut on downbeats. And it does provide a natural rhythm to your editing because you're editing the music and it just makes life a lot easier. And now sometimes the best rhythm will come on a beat, but that doesn't mean every single one has to be. It's a choice at that point. For example, when I was doing this original edit, I edited the whole project without any music whatsoever. I did the whole thing. 30 seconds where I more or less built out all of these sequences and did it without music and just kind of figured out what was the rhythm of this kind of story. What was too much for a shot? What was too little? What was too much for a sequence? What was too little? And just kind of figuring out how each one had a life of its own. Then when I had the song that I wanted, I dropped that in and I then essentially re-edited the whole spot to be on the beat when I wanted it to, when it was a choice, not when it was a necessity. So when I play the opening,
we believe queens don't rule alone. They rule together.
Like they're very hard kick drum beats. Like it's like boom, boom, boom. And with this commercial kind of being about the empowerment and the strength and kind of like the independence that comes with all of this, I wanted to make sure that the video began with that kind of energy. The video began with some oomph. The video began with some kick of its own. And so this is a way to make sure of that. It just, like I said, it made the most sense to start this video with this kind of editing style. And it's right around this, once we kind of leave this first sequence and we go into the second sequence right here where we're now in the subway station, where I don't edit on the beat because it doesn't make sense there. This one had its own rhythm that it lived on, and it made sense for this part of the project to just be its own thing, its own style. Another thing that really gave some creativity injected into this piece was the use of these montages. Now, as you can tell from the beginning of the montage to the end, it's only 3 seconds and we have 4 shots in here. 4 shots. And the longest one lives for about a second. And so this is something that I wanted to be a motif in the spot, but I didn't want it to be a gimmick. And I think there's like a fine line there. And I think it comes down, at least in this project, to how much you used it. I used it twice in the whole project. And I felt like any more it was a gimmick of this kind of like film looking, quick cuts, just kind of creating a vibe more than a story. But if I did it just once, it's like, that doesn't make sense. You need it to connect to something else there in the video for it to feel like it was done purposefully and not just kind of like a last second afterthought, like we needed to fill 3 seconds, so let's just throw this in here. These are overlays that are done by Ezra Cohen, and they're solid overlays. And the reason I chose to use them here was because I really wanted to have a different feeling. The purpose of the collection, or the inspiration of the collection, was Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. So I wanted to make sure that the video itself had eras of its own. You know, for here, we're in this very trendy, modern looking video type. And then we go over here and it's super quick cuts. It's got film overlays, you know, it's got even like right here, you can see that's the word Kodak. And so I really wanted to use like the inspiration for the collection as inspiration for the video. And so another thing I wanted to do was a mix of slow-mo and normal speed. And when I say a mix of slow-mo and normal speed, I mean, we obviously filmed some at slow, some at normal. What I wanted to use though is I wanted to be very intentional with how I used it. And this is simultaneously a directing choice and an editing choice. Because while through these sequences, you'll only notice slow-mo footage, there was some filming of, you know, normal speed footage. But when I was editing it, I wanted to just give both of these scenes their own vibe. I wanted them to live on their own. And this was a deliberate choice we made with these two scenes, but also the other two scenes as well. There is no scene that mixes slow-mo and normal speed. It's either completely in slow speed or it's completely in normal speed. And again, the reason we did that was so that each sequence and scene had its own unique identity. That was a big part of all of this, was identity being a key driving factor for every decision that we made. Another thing that the combination of slow motion and normal speed and within sequences can create when used intentionally is it gives the feeling of a different type of pacing. You know, when you have them mixed together, it just kind of blends and we don't know what's done intentionally and what's done unintentionally. But when you use it so that we're going from a normal speed to even quicker cuts, and then when we hit this kind of higher frame rate, slower speed, it feels as if we've slowed down time. Even if the length of the cuts might be the same, like if they're both 2 seconds long, it's still going to feel like this is more methodical, that this is slower, that this is more intentional, just because there's less information per frame to digest. We're not moving as quickly. So when I was coloring this project, what I used was Tom Bolus's Cineprint 16 film emulation. Some of the biggest adjustments I made based off of this was I did add a film stock. I added Kodak 2383, like there you can see Lot Rec 709, Kodak 2383 D55 film stock to it. It's what I felt had kind of the most bang for your buck in terms of bringing out the colors while still respecting kind of what the initial image looked like. The rest of it were kind of changing colors and morphing it to be a very different look. So again, you know, I kind of more or less stuck to his basics that he's got going on here. The one thing I did change was in the post contrast, I really wanted to make sure these subjects popped. And the way I did that was I made sure to put a mask around just the subject. And then I really, as you can see right here, I kind of edited everything so that they stuck out more. Like if I turn this off, you can see the difference that's being done right there. They're just really being brightened up just that bit and really being pulled to the center of our attention. Right here, you know, this works. That's totally doable. Like if I unclick off of it, this works. That's a totally fine image. But what can we do to take it that one step further? And that's making sure our subject stands out. And there you go. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting fall off on the sides. Like you can see right here, you're getting fall off on the sides where it's, you know, a bit darker, not as drawing your eye. And then right here in the center, that's where all of our attention is going, because that's, you know, that's kind of the brightest focal point of the image. So one of my favorite things about DaVinci is that you can just straight up copy and paste color attributes into the next image. So did the exact same thing here. You'll notice all of it's the same from the top to the bottom, same film stock. The film stock stayed the same throughout the entire project. I thought that was an important thing, was if we're gonna commit to a look, commit to a look. And that includes making sure that every clip has that same film emulation, so that we're all just kind of having that cohesion, so everything has that similar look. But yeah, as you'll see here, again, just kind of pointing out the reason for that centering. Kind of like highlight boost right there is like, okay, totally fine, works totally good. But what if, bam, look at a difference that makes. And like I said, you know, I kind of just copy and pasted. If they were part of the same sequence, part of the same scene and location, I more or less just copied and pasted everything. Then the rest of these were pretty straightforward, all things considered. I mean, it wasn't really until we got to these last few shots that we really ran into any trouble. And it was due to the fact that the lighting had changed. Like you can see the sun is a bit softer here, as opposed to when, like you can see on the building primarily, the shadows aren't as harsh until you get to this one where like all of a sudden it's a much brighter sun. The clouds that must have been blocking it had gone away. And that just required some finagling of like making sure these matched as best as I could. You know, once you film something, you can't change light. Like it's done, for better or for worse. Like the way the scene is lit, it's lit, and you can't really change too much in that direction. So I was just doing the best I could to make sure that these matched in terms of making it seem like it wasn't a completely different day. I mean, it had only been maybe 5 minutes between the takes of separating this one to the front as opposed to this model, just rotating them around, but the clouds had moved. And so we just wanted to make sure that they matched as best they could. And so that's how I made a commercial from the beginning to the end of the process. I'll make sure to either link in the description, or if I can learn how to do it, put like a little like box right here where you could click on it. If there's nothing there, I still don't know how to do that. So if anybody knows how, please teach me. But yeah, you know, you've seen the whole thing from beginning to end. So I would love for you guys to take a look at the final piece and let me know what you think.
We believe queens don't rule alone. They rule together. Because no matter how you got there, you're at the top for a reason.